Welcome to Old Path and our Monday studies through the Old Testament, currently in the book of Isaiah. And we'll be finishing out the first chapter today. And I'll make some observations as we get to this. There's just some really interesting ways of how this has been viewed through the years. And a little bit of it's going to depend on what your eschatology is. And that'll all make sense here as we get into this just a little bit. Today is, as I record this, I'm recording it to get a little bit ahead of being out of town. We're going to be taking a trip to Israel, so I'm actually recording this on the 6th of October, and it won't be posting for another week from today. But why I say all this is that tomorrow marks the 2-year anniversary of the attack from Hamas on Israel. And there is a lot going on in the news. And needless to say, there's quite a bit of what seems to be, or what they are reporting as movement in trying to deal with hostages and bring this whole thing to a close. But of course, I'm always quite skeptical about that, mainly because of who the participants are. One side of the participants, actually, that being Hamas. And so I wanted to look at that a little bit, and to take a look at where we are as far as the process goes. And I really do want to, if we can, take a real quick look at what's been proposed, but then also to remember who Hamas is and what they're all about, and why this is, I think, not what's being reported seems unlikely to me. And I'll give my reasons why. So interesting that we look at this. It's actually 2 weeks from today. We leave for Israel, so I covet your prayers on that. Looking forward to getting there. I'm not expecting any repercussions from this as far as our trip is concerned. Hamas is really not in any kind of a position to do much of anything. And really the surrounding people who've been pretty belligerent because of what's happened in the last 2 years. Israel has become incredibly proactive and going after the ones who had done things towards them and said things towards them. They were they've been pretty prolific at going back after their enemies. So hopefully our trip will probably, there's a lot of people that are afraid to travel because they just don't know what's going on there. So hopefully our trip will have lots of access to places that are usually kind of hard to get in and out of because there's so many people. But we're very much looking forward to it, and can't wait to get there and get the group out to see these things. So we're going to be having another trip coming up here. So be paying attention to that. If you're interested in going, maybe you even wanted to go on this trip with us, but you were a little bit apprehensive about going, I'll have some details for something we're thinking about next year, and you can contact me through the ministry's website, which is oldpaththeology.net, and I'd love to get a chance to go over that with you and tell you about what we've got going on. You can contact me about anything that we do on the channel here, the different topics that we do, maybe topics that you'd like to see addressed in the question and answers that we do. I'll be having some that came up really because we did a series on the New Apostolic Reformation, and ultimately it's Dominion theology, and then the little arms and the tentacles of that. You hear it talked about in discussions all the time, but I think a lot of times people don't really fully get it. So anyway, very interesting times in which we live, and a very, very monumental day tomorrow that we will remember for the last 2 years, what took place 2 years ago tomorrow. And so anyhow, we get to the book of Isaiah, the closing part of the chapter. Let me go ahead and preview it if I could real quick. We'll read the whole of the text, and then we'll go back and look at it a little bit closer. Now, the discussion is really based upon this. When is all of what God is saying here, when will these things actually happen? When are they going to take place? And so your candidates for it are at the time of the Babylonian captivity, and then the return that comes back. And so God going to do all of those things there. And then the favorable things that would be taking place would be done under Ezra and Nehemiah. But even that, sad news, is that didn't last more than a generation or so. And they were, again, kind of put into the wilderness, if you would. Book of Malachi covers the last of the writing prophets. And things had already kind of reverted back to the bad condition of things, even after the incredible resurgence, if you will, and all the reforms that took place under Ezra and Nehemiah. they had pretty much come to an end as far as the priesthood was concerned by Malachi. So just a very dark part of their history, and that was really it. And from there you would have the Babylonians, but the Persians that would give way ultimately to the Greeks and then to the Romans. So as Isaiah says what he says here, the candidates that we have for it, if this is actually something that happened, all of this would fit what happened during the time of Ahaz. And you can go ahead and read about that. I'll give you the reference here in just a moment. But you can read all about the time of Ahaz and what God ended up doing to bring his reign to an end. And then you had all the things that God had preserved his people, those not being judged. And the time under Hezekiah, the next king, was actually very fruitful and very good, and he was solid as far as walking rightly before the Lord. We know that that fell apart again. And that fell apart under the time of Manasseh. And so after Manasseh, you had Josiah. And so it was a very good time. So you would have, again, is that a candidate for what he's talking about, the removing of the wickedness, whether it's Ahaz or now in this case, is it Manasseh? And is Josiah in mind here? Or is it the destruction of Jerusalem that ended up coming to pass, but then the restoration that happened under Ezra and Nehemiah? So you have those candidates, and then you have, of course, the ultimate candidate would be that at the end of time, and as the Lord returns and restores things the way that they are supposed to be. So what I think of all of our options, and it's the direction that I'll take in this, you could say, does it have application to Ahaz and then giving way to Hezekiah? Yes, that has a great application. Does it have application going from Manasseh to Josiah? Absolutely. Does it have a way of giving way from the time of Josiah's sons and then ultimately through Jehoiakim being taken away, and everybody from that point on just being a vassal, kind of a put in place by the Babylonians as far as their power is concerned? But then the restorations that come under Ezra and Nehemiah after the Babylonians and into the time of the Persians. So would that be a way that you could say this was a fulfillment? And then, of course, the one that will ultimately be when God returns, Jesus returns to the earth, and he cleanses and purges all of the stuff that's happening in Jerusalem at the time. It's a time of great turmoil, and then he sets up and establishes his kingdom, because I have the eschatology, the view of the end times, that he will return soon to our time. And there will be a time of tribulation on the earth for 7 years. And at the end of that 7 years, he'll come back and establish a kingdom here on earth. And so that would be a great fulfillment of the things that we're looking at here. But in all of those cases, what you have is still the same people. You still have those people who would be in place where God once purged the ones who were there, and ultimately he wants to establish his own kingdom. Where it is a little bit tough to make it in a perfect sense when he returns, the kind of leadership that he has a real problem with here doesn't fit all that well from what we have of what's going on during the tribulation. Because by the time that he comes to the earth at the end of the tribulation, what you have there is the reign of man and the Antichrist, and all of that stuff is put down. So that's something that happens when he returns. So it's not as much he's looking at the leadership. So it does have its best fulfillment in the kings and the reign of the kings from the time that Isaiah would be writing this. So Ahaz is a good candidate, of course, for being the one that's going to be torn down. Also, Manasseh would be a great example of that as well. And then really, but when Ezra and Nehemiah come back, there's really not a king per se. They have basically magistrates and governors and all that stuff. They're just really a province of the Persians at that point. So you have a couple of candidates that fit really, really well. Ahaz probably works the best because of what we know, what brought down his ultimate his kingship was pretty much like this, where God removes him through nations, and war is what takes him. So it's just an interesting way you can say, does it really kind of put in place more of a pattern of how God does things? That when you have wicked people that are reigning, that God will allow them for a time to exist, but he won't put up with them indefinitely. So if you want to go ahead and take a look at, we're going to start here at verse 21, and it runs through the end of the chapter, which is at verse 31. And if you want to take a look at Ahaz, the reign of Ahaz is found in 2 Kings chapter 16. And so you can find there that it talks about what happened and all of the turmoil that he had. So not only the Syrians, but even the northern tribes under Pekah, the king of Israel, and others that came against him. And all of it was because of his rebellion against God, which he saw as God's impotence. And then he saw that because Syria could conquer them, then the gods of Syria must be greater. Which just shows how insane and out of his mind he had become. And he really didn't follow a bad king in Uzziah, a man who honored God. So the whole thing is just kind of, or Jotham, I should say, but it's just kind of a real odd thing to look at how he reigned and the things that he did. Now we know that rule of the kings that Isaiah was working under, it's found in verse 1. And that's Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and then Hezekiah. So Ahaz was the one who had the biggest problem. And we know about him by reading his backstory again, 2 Kings 16. So if that's the case, it fits really nicely to this. But if we don't want to kind of get necessarily wed, if you will, to one particular king and one particular era of time, what you can find is that this is ultimately what God said would take place. If there was wickedness among his leadership, he's going to purge that leadership. And it would happen repetitiously. It's happened again and again and again. But ultimately, it's going to be that God will remove those who are in rejection of him and in rebellion, and he will hold them to account, preserve his people, and he will establish what is righteous rule in his kingdom, because it's ultimately his. So that will take place clearly when he returns to the earth. So there's really not any doubt with that. So it's with that idea that we jump into the text again, verse 21. Let's have a word of prayer, and we'll take a look at the text. Father, we thank you again so much that we can come to your word, and that you encourage us to study and to depend upon the work of the Holy Spirit, opening our eyes and making proper application to the things that we see. We know, Father, that you desire that people who call upon your name walk rightly and honorably before you. And so as we make application to this, learning the history, may we also learn why this would be relevant to us today. So we thank you, and we pray that you would guide our study as we take this time and we look into your word. We ask for your guidance in Jesus' name. All right, so verses 21 to 23 just kind of gives us God's assessment of the situation and how bad it has become. And then what he's going to do is what follows. So let's just read the whole of the text that we have, and then we'll take the block of verses 21 to 23. Where he kind of just talks about, here's the corruption, here's the condition of things. So at verse 21, we read this, how the faithful city has become a harlot. And that's just kind of an exclamation. Can you believe how this is? So he says, it was full of justice, righteousness lodged in it, but now murderers. Your silver has become dross, your wine mixed with water. Your princes are rebellious, and they are companions of thieves. Everyone loves bribes, and everyone follows after rewards. They do not defend the fatherless, and nor does the cause of the widow come before them. Therefore, the Lord says, the Lord of hosts, the mighty one of Israel, I will rid myself of my adversaries, and I will take vengeance on my enemies. I will turn my hand against you and thoroughly purge away your dross and take away all of your alloy. I will restore your judgments as at the first, and your counselors as at the beginning. Afterward, you will be called a city of righteousness, the faithful city. Zion will be redeemed with justice, and her penalties with righteousness. The destruction of the transgressors and of sinners shall be together. And those who forsake the Lord shall be consumed, for they shall be ashamed of the terebinth trees which they have desired, and they shall be embarrassed because of the gardens which they have chosen, or which you have chosen. For you shall be as a terebinth tree whose leaf fades, and a garden that has no water. The strong shall be as tinder, and the work of of it as a spark. Both will burn together, and no one will quench them. So a pretty telling thing that God says here. Now, what's important about this is it really kind of sets in motion what will be. I know I've made mention of this probably once or twice, even to this point in this, but what we read in this first chapter is pretty much going to be God's interaction with the nation, really that's kind of comprised of what's Judah, knowing that the north is about to fail, the northern tribes. God's focus will be, and the last of them to fall would be Judah. And so that's where Jerusalem would be. It's comprised, Judah would be ultimately Benjamin and Judah of the tribes. That's what comprised the southern kingdom. And they were kind of sectioned up. After the death of Solomon, Rehoboam, his son, took the southern tribes. Now, again, that doesn't mean that there aren't people from the other tribes living among them, but the tribal allotments, what was the north versus the south, interesting when you look at actually a map of where the tribes settled. Benjamin and Judah are very close to one another. Benjamin is a small tribe just to the north of Judah, but Simeon was to the south and to the west of Jerusalem, inside the land of Judah, but they sided with the northern tribes. So you can go back and read. It's an interesting history, but it doesn't really matter a great deal. When the northern tribes were conquered by the Assyrians, they kind of just were dispersed throughout the empire, and there was a lot of interaction there. People would move in, and so the north was always kind of seen as corrupt. It was a mixture of the Jewish people and of the conquering Assyrians, and it was just kind of mixed together. This is what gave the religious leaders down in Jerusalem that idea that we're the purists. And so unfortunately that animosity that there was between the north and the south continued all the way to Jesus's time, 600 years, basically 700 years after the events. So interesting how all of that stuff works out. It's a fascinating study when you look at the history. So anyway, here's what God assesses. Here's what he sees as he looks at Judah and Jerusalem in particular. And we know that that's the case because remember, in verse 1 of chapter 1, the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amos, what he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of. So those four kings, his focus is on Judah and Jerusalem in particular. So Jerusalem being the capital, and it's inside the tribal allotment of Judah. So he says that about the place. Remember, this is where God said, this is where I want my name to be here. This is the place that I've chosen. This is Mount Moriah. This is Zion. This is Jerusalem, known by those different names, same plot of land. Tiny little place, by the way. People that go there with us are always surprised to find out just how small Jerusalem is, the old city of Jerusalem and the city of David. The surrounding, what we know as Jerusalem, is much larger, but it wasn't so in those days. That was outside the walls of what would have been Jerusalem. You had the outskirts of it, but inside the city could be secured by walls. So what that was quite small. So with that being in mind, in verse 21, it says, now how the faithful city has become a harlot, and it was full of justice. Righteousness lodged in it, but now murderers. So this is the condition of it. There is what it is now, there is what it became, and this is really kind of the ultimate problem that he has. There's the idea that this is all repetitious. This happens from their history. After he writes this, you can see this happens, unfortunately, all too often. It's a repetition. So that faithful city, what was once a faithful city, has now gone into harlotry. So harlots, obviously we know what that is. This is a person who is not concerned about fidelity, and basically you will sell yourself for whatever the price may be. But it's also used just as in a metaphoric sense as one who has given themselves over to someone else, played a harlot. So he sees them, whether this is looking at them towards their unfaithfulness to him as a bride would be. That's what they should have been to God. But it also speaks, ultimately what was the harlotry? The harlotry was the serving of other gods and all of their spiritual rebellion. So it used to be, at one time, it was filled with justice and righteousness lodged in it. So what would that actually look like? So, of course, we know when it was actually established and a temple was built, and there was proper worship. Things were the way that they were supposed to be, as far as the kings and the people who ruled with him, the people who ruled under him, guys like David and Solomon. There was a time when these things were in operation in Jerusalem. So into the early parts of Solomon's time, certainly during David's time, but there was that understanding that the priests should be doing what they're doing. There should be the righteous judges who hear the cases of the people. So there was a time, as Isaiah writes this, though currently not the case, there was a time when these things were in operation. So judges ruled, the kings had the things the way that they were supposed to be. It was right as far as God was concerned. The people were in a right standing from the king on down to the people. So now, by contrast, God sees it as involved in harlotry. They have moved away from him. And it says, and then also, where there used to be justice and where righteousness was, now there are murderers. And remember earlier in the chapter, he talks about those people who have blood on their hands. They go through the motions, but they're bloody people. So this, some see this as related to being the same thought. In either case, God assesses them this way. Your silver has become dross, and so this is, the question is their own riches, or is it really meant metaphorically, again, of speaking of the people? What used to be during that time of righteousness, the people, the kings, all the rest of it were like silver. Instead, they've turned into the stuff that would be floating to the surface when you would refine silver. This would be the impurities. The dross is the stuff that goes away. You scrape it off the top, and then what remains is the pure silver. You take away all the impurities. Well, that's what dross is. So what you used to be is what you are now. And so if he's using that as a way of trying to describe the condition of the rulers and of the people, what used to be silver, now it's been melted down, and all that you are, you're represented by that stuff that you scrape off the top that's of no value because it's impure. So he says your wine has been mixed with water. Once again, that mixture of what is the genuine with what is the diluting of things, the water. So you used to be in that pure state, that wine and the silver. Now you're what happens when you start to dilute it down. Spiritually speaking, he refers to them as being into harlotry, and they're murderers. Now again, dross and the mixture of wine and water. So it's pretty telling as God sees them. And again, remember, he's doing this through a prophet. And he's doing this through Isaiah to say, here's the condition of you people as I see it, and this is why I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And this sets in motion really pretty much the writings of all of the prophets, especially if they're speaking to Judah. But ultimately, if there's anybody that's rebellious against God, knowing better, they would be put on notice from a chapter like this. And that's kind of why we're taking our time with this chapter, because it really sets, if you will, in motion a bit of a pattern. And really, future to our time, God will do the same thing, though this is very specifically geared towards Jerusalem and Judah. When God comes back to the earth and when he sets up his kingdom at the end of the tribulation, it's still very much the same thing. The people who should know better, again, if you read through Revelation and you take the literal view as I do with it, when we went through it months ago, I believe that is all very much literal what happens during the tribulation. There is no question of who is doing what during that time. We know that even from chapter 6, when the people are saying, save us from the wrath of the one who's seated on the throne and from the Lamb. So they know that there is something very, very wrong going on. They know what's causing it, but they don't repent. God gives them time, and actually that wording is even used. He gave them time to repent, not only just in the 7 churches, but during the tribulation. So people will choose to do their rebellion, even though they know there's a price to pay and they understand who it is that's doing it. So there was time even at that point. Instead of just saying, hide us from the one who's there, why don't you go and make peace with him? But they didn't. So this idea that God is saying, I'm telling you all these things in advance so that you are without excuse. This is to put them on notice. This is accountability. So he says this in verse 23, your princes are rebellious. And so this is your ruling class. They're in a place of utter rejection of who God is. So they'll hear these things and they will do the complete opposite. And it sounds, this is this really is indicative of all of mankind that lives in a way of rejection. But again, remember, he's pointing this out to the religious leadership of the time and to the ruling class. These are the ones who are corrupt, and he's going to make sure that they understand this. And this, again, this is going to carry all the way through the prophets. Isaiah will have so much more to say on this. So he says this, and this again, remember, this is God who's speaking these things, using Isaiah to do it. So he says, your princes are rebellious, and companions, they make their companionship with people who are thieves. They will take. So this is what, if you look at this of qualifications, if you will, this is the complete opposite of what God would want of his leaders, because unfortunately, if the leaders are corrupt, the people will follow. They're the ones who set in motion not only by example, but they make the way for people to do the things that they do. So they are themselves in a place of open rebellion against God, and they are companions of thieves. Everyone loves a bribe or bribes. They'll issue out whatever it is that they do as far as they're adjudicating their justice, whatever. You could, again, bribe the person. So this is what they're always going after, as he says here. Also, they follow after rewards. If somebody's going to offer them something for a favorable outcome to whatever they would oversee, they'll be, putting their thumb on the scale of the person that they want to ingratiate themselves to. And so, again, this idea of taking bribes. So it says, now they do not defend the fatherless, nor do they cause the widow to come before them. Now, this is something that was expected of the people, is to take care of those who are widows. And you find this throughout the law. But I want to take one little place to look at in this, and it's found in the book of Exodus. Let's go there. And Exodus 22, and I'll just show you why I find this to be very, very interesting. We also know James talks about this. You want to know what pure and undefiled religion looks like? Go and take care of the widows and the orphans. That's what James would say. If you want to find out somebody who's doing it right, look for the people who will go take care of the needs of the people who can't take care of their own needs. The fatherless, the orphans, and the widows. They have no one to do these things for them. So it should be seen by the people who can, to make sure that there is those people are taken care of. So again, you find that the poor are discussed a lot in the law. The idea that if you have a field and it's plentiful, you go ahead and you take to the field and you get everything out of it that's produce, but you leave the corners, and the people that don't have anything can go and glean. God would want to see that they're taken care of. Now, what you see in Exodus 22, let's see, where do we want to go? Let me just give you a few, just get a kind of a flavor for how this works. There's a whole number of things. God says, I don't want this done. I don't want that done. I want this done. I want that done. He gives those, and some of these are just very, very one sentence, one verse, and he moves on to the next one. So here's an indication of it. Verse 18, you will not permit a sorcerer to live, or a witch. Whoever lies with an animal will surely be put to death. He who sacrifices to anyone except the Lord only, he will be utterly destroyed. You shall neither mistreat a stranger nor oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So you notice each verse has something that just whatever follows is, of course, it's related in that this is how you're supposed to act and be right before God, but they're not necessarily connected. Now look at what he does here when it comes to the matter of widows and orphans. You will not afflict, and the afflicting is you won't mishandle them, you won't humiliate them in what they're going through. These are people who have had whatever, by whatever means it's happened. You're talking about a person who has been widowed, so her husband is dead, or a child whose parents have died. So clearly they've been victimized plenty by just the circumstances of things. You're not going to make it worse for them. So he says this, you shall not afflict any widow, and this is what you find in James 1:27, where he talks about pure and undefiled religion. So you will not afflict any widow or a fatherless child, orphan. If you afflict them in any way and they cry out at all to me, I will surely hear their cry. And my wrath will become hot, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives will be the next widows, and your children will be fatherless. Notice how he has a lot to say on this. So you would think, is he concerned about this? He's already brought it up in verse 17 once before, referring back to matters like this in the law. And there are numbers of places where the laws say that. But once again, James would take it and say, this is what we're supposed to be doing, and if you want to find somebody who's doing it right, you'll notice that they're taking care of the orphans and widows. But James didn't just pick that out of a hat. He knows that that's what God has been saying from the beginning. So the people in Isaiah's time, as he's talking to them, they are not doing as they should. And then the question would be, what would God do about it if the widows and the orphans are being neglected or humiliated or forgotten and not seen to their need? Well, we already know where God stands on it. We just read it there in Exodus, and it's pretty telling stuff. So he says this, they do not defend the fatherless, nor does the cause of the widow come up before them. They won't even hear their case. So if these are people who, because of that, start to cry out to God, no wonder what's about to happen happens. But it's one of so many reasons, because again, he's already said they're murderers, they want to take bribes, they're not righteous any longer. He's already gone into that whole litany of things, and this is just kind of the symptoms of it. And so what he's going to do is what really kind of follows. The nations are going to come and be successful at making war against Jerusalem that would be absolutely impervious. There's no way that anyone would win a war against Israel if God was with them and they were walking rightly before him. So we find that through the history of the kings. When the kings were doing what they're supposed to do, it's going to happen right after Ahaz. When Hezekiah is the king, the Assyrians come all the way there, and the Assyrians absolutely should have been able to do everything that they threatened to do. They were the superior force, hands down. There's really no question here. They could have waited out any kind of a siege. They could have taken Jerusalem and wiped it out. Wouldn't have been a problem had it not been for God hearing Isaiah and Hezekiah. And we'll get a chance to hear that as we get later into the book. It's covered in this book. So, therefore, verse 24 says, therefore, now because of that, the Lord says, the Lord of hosts, the mighty one of Israel. That's him identifying himself, and this is a military kind of a thing that he's talking about. Not only is he God, but he's the host. That's a way of saying in the military sense. Not only is he the sovereign, he's the almighty God, he's also the one who takes up the cause, and he's going to come against them. He's already threatened to do it. He's already said he's going to. Now he's saying who I am by authority. This is what I'm going to do. So he says, I will rid myself of my adversaries, or those people who put themselves up as rebellious against me. Remember, Ahaz had done that by just saying, well, God didn't save me from the Syrians, so their God must be greater. Well, that makes him an adversary. Instead of coming to the Lord and saying, how did this happen? Why did this happen? God would have said, because you're in a place of complete rebellion. Now, if you want to fix it, we can do something about this, but God's not going to impose that. That's got to be something he comes to his own end of things and seeks out God, which he never does. So we read on. I will rid myself of my adversaries, and I will take vengeance on my enemies. So not only were they adversarial, but God sees them as his enemies. Now he's coming at them. So once again, remember, what would make them an enemy or an adversary? They themselves are in open rebellion, but notice that the people will do the same things. So when the leadership from the top starts to open the door to all kinds of wickedness, the nation goes into that kind of wickedness. That's not a rebellion kind of a thing where they just say, we won't have somebody like this rule over us. You can see that when it happens from the top, it always seemed to work its way down. And it worked that way in the opposite as well. When a righteous person was walking before God, and of course all the things would be as they're supposed to be, then God is moving in their midst and the people would gravitate towards that. But, as the old saying, the fish rots from the head down. It happened in both ways. It can be in a favorable way. If the leadership is as it should be, the people will see the reforms. And yeah, that leader is going to lead in a good way or a bad way. We see it obviously in the very negative sense here. So he says this, I will turn my hand against you and thoroughly purge away your dross. I'm going to scrape it off the top. So anybody who's ever done this, and if you've ever seen it, I've never done it with silver, but we've done it with lead. Long story, but as a kid, I remember this melting down lead, and you see all the stuff that's on the top, so you just wipe it away. It's just the dross. It's the impurity. So you scrape that stuff away, and God's using that imagery. You have been producing dross. What used to be silver is now dross, and I'm scraping it away, getting rid of it. So I will purge away your dross, and I will take away all of your alloy, even the stuff that remains. There's nothing going to be left to you. So not only the dross, but also anything that's of use, anything that's good. I will, at that time, when this all takes place, once I've gotten rid of the awful stuff, here's what I will replace it with. And then I will restore your judges as at the first. Now, the judges would be the things hearing the needs of the people. They would be brought before the judges, and the judges would rule on these matters. And it was that way under David, under Solomon, under the good kings in the south. There were those times when these things were in operation. The judges would hear and make righteous judgment. God would give them direction. He'd already given them the law. They had very firm guidelines if they're walking according to the law. So I'm going to put it, God says, I'm going to put this back the way that it was at the beginning of the nation, the beginning of the kings, the beginning of the time when the people were walking with me. At least you can make the case that he's referring to the kings, but you can say it would really go back to the time since there was the law, and they started to have judges do these things. When the people were walking rightly before him, these things were in operation even before the kings. So at the time under Joshua coming into the land, even with all of their failures, it doesn't mean that the nation was ever perfect, but there were times clearly when it's not like it is now. So we read this. So I will restore the judges as at the first, and your counselors as at the beginning. And the counselors would be the ones who would come alongside and give their advice, if you will, and their counsel to the kings. So, man, when you start to read through the times of David in particular, and sometimes there were good people around him and sometimes really bad people around him. Same thing with Solomon. We know that there were some really good things in Solomon's early years. We don't know a lot about it, but we know that the actions of Solomon gave very good indication. Josiah is a prime example of this. Josiah takes the throne at 8 years old. Clearly, he's surrounded by some very, very good people because of what happens right off the bat. And as he grows older, all those people that were around him, it shows in his life. He's a fascinating, fascinating guy. So go and read up on him, and you get an idea what God's talking about here. There are those times when from the leaders, from the king on down, the rulers, whoever they may be, when they're walking rightly before me and they appoint people under them to do likewise, then there's those times. I'm going to have it just like it was at other times. And afterward, you then will be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city. Remember, that's how we started in verse 21, how the faithful city has become a harlot. That's what it had become when God institutes this by removing all of the filth and the people in rebellion against him, and all that remains are the ones who want to do rightly before him. Then he will have this be the outcome of it. So he says, verse 27, Zion will be redeemed with justice. And so that redeem gives the impression of a ransom. So they're being held, and the way that God will redeem them back from that ransom is that he will start to see things done in a just way, which he's already pronounced. Justice would dictate, God's already said it, if you're going to fall into a place of harlotry and rebellion against me, I'm going to remove you. And I'm going to get rid of the remnant of everything that you've produced. That would be a just outcome because he is a just judge. So he's going to, in a way of like adjudicating a case brought before him, I'm going to, he already knows the evidence, but work with me here. He says, I'm going to hear the evidence and I'm going to render a verdict. And when I do, it will lead to the ransoming or the redemption back from where the people had gone. So he says, Zion will be redeemed with justice and her penalties with righteousness. So notice how interesting this is, that God will take what was and restore what should have been, how it has been before. So again, this is the time when he is going to say enough is enough, and I'm going to step in, and it's time to purge the nation. They won't be able to get away with this. Even though he's going to use foreign nations, pagan nations, to do what he's going to do, they will be the instrument that he uses in Ahaz's case that basically removes him. But by doing so, what God replaces him with is Hezekiah. So and this is all during the time of Isaiah. He's there when all this takes place. So he says, and then her pertinence with righteousness. So, or penitence, rather. The people who come before him and seek his forgiveness. Those people will be seen as righteous or acceptable before him. He will accept them. So, verse 28, the destruction of transgressors and of sinners shall be all together. So he's going to do this as one big thing. He's going to hear, and he's going to restore, and the penitent who will come before him, he'll forgive and replace them, or replace to them righteousness. However, at the same time, he does it all at one time. There's going to be a purging of those people who are wicked, which he says the destruction of the transgressors and the sinners will be all together. This is something that God's going to do in one fell swoop. And again, you can look through the history of this, and it happened just like he's saying here with Ahaz to Hezekiah. It happened just like that. It happened in a similar sense from Manasseh to Josiah. The other ones that you'll get after that, like after the Babylonian captivity, Ezra and Nehemiah, it starts to lose a little bit because you don't have necessarily, at the time of Ezra and Nehemiah coming back, Nehemiah and Ezra literally along the chronology, but either way, you don't have the same kind of kings through the kingly line in quite the same way, from starting at basically David and through his line north and south. You don't have that by the time of the end of the Babylonian into the Persian captivity. So this fits really the kings that are in sight of Isaiah, and shortly after Hezekiah, then to Manasseh, Josiah. That works. You can look at the history and say, oh, that kind of has a good application. But the bigger, broader picture is that ultimately God does purge out wickedness when his timing is right and when he's ready to do it. According to his timing, he doesn't just wake up someday and say, yeah, it's about time. Everything that he does is deliberate. He knows to the second when he's going to do things before he does them. So none of these things was done on a whim. All this stuff was done in accordance with his will. It's already part of his program. So we read on, and it says, those who forsake the Lord will be consumed. Now, the forsaking is, as we think of as the divorce. It's the, I'm turning my back on you. I'm going the opposite direction. I forsake you. It's a divorce kind of a thing. The people who will do that are going to be consumed. It just simply means brought to an end. You'll have the end of your rebellion. At that point, when you say you'll divorce yourself from me, that's fine. It's not, I'm going to let you continue to go that way. You're going to be brought to an end. And again, we can look at the history of this. You see that that's precisely how it happened. So, however it is, the people who came to an end, look at what happened with Manasseh, look what happened with Ahaz. They were brought to an end, and the people who followed them ultimately were too, because in comes the new regime walking rightly before God. So, verse 30 says this, for you will be as a terebinth whose leaf fades. And I'm sorry, I cut out 19. For they shall be ashamed of their terebinth trees. And a terebinth tree is also just referred to as an oak. So the imagery that's here from things that we understand historically and other places where it's used, there were places that they had that were set up for their idol worship. And terebinth trees where they would have their asherahs, and the gardens, places where they could go and they would perform whatever it is that they were doing in their ritual sense, their idolatry. So here God's using terms that are much, much more familiar to them than us. We only get bits. We can kind of piece some of it together. And then there's some historical stuff, but not a whole lot. It's definitely, when they hear it, they know precisely what this is. So somehow they had made these gardens and these trees objects of some kind of their worship. They were involved in their worship. So they would have these groves and all these places where they would go do their stuff. So that's what's being referred to. And so God's going to use that imagery. When you see terebinth, some of your translations might even say oak. So it's not so much a concern of, do we know the exact variety? Big picture, these were groves, these were trees, these were places where they would go to do their worship. And as the pagans, they learned this stuff from the pagans. Just remember that. It's not something new with them. They had to learn it from someone. And so whatever these gardens represent, these would be literal places. There's a lot of speculation of what took place in their rituals and all that stuff. And again, it's just speculative, though people who really have an opinion on this feel very firmly about it. To me, it's like if we get so stuck on getting into the minutia of it that we really can't absolutely know, we might miss the big picture. God is saying, I have been watching the things that you have been doing collectively as a people of your outward worship of idols. I've seen it. And so here he's holding them accountable for what they've been doing. So he says they will be ashamed of their terebinth trees. And this isn't a matter of them saying, in a way of penitence, though there are some people that are going to be penitent, he says. Maybe there are some people who will actually be confronted for what they do and they'll turn from it. But the shaming here is they're going to get to a point where they'll just realize what they've been doing is so wrong. It's not that they're sorry, but now they're having to pay the consequence of it. It will be a shame to them. Not that they are ashamed, but it will be a shameful thing that they had allowed this to happen and pursued them. So they will be ashamed of the terebinth or the oak trees, which they have desired. So that means it was willful. They went looking for it. They didn't fall into it. They desired these things. And you will be embarrassed because of the gardens. You'll be, because, as he says, which you have chosen. So that's, you've chosen those things over me. When I'm doing all these things and I'm putting an end to all of that stuff, you're going to be ashamed of what you've done. And again, is it going to be something that's too late when he goes through and does all that? So again, we don't get enough of the specifics. This is very big picture kind of stuff. We get a little bit about the penitent people, the ones who come before him and seek his forgiveness. So when these things will be taking place, and I'm reminded, it's a good time to say it now, I am reminded that as awful as this had become, remember there are Isaiahs living there. There are people like Isaiah. There are other prophets who are prophesying at the time. So it's not like if there's 1 million people there, all 1 million of them are wicked, horrible people. You have a remnant of people, as it always works, that are still devoted to God. In this case, Isaiah is a great example. But they're having to live under horrible conditions because of the wickedness that's rampant around them, from the top leadership of the nation all the way just to the common people on the street. So he says, so you've done this, is what you've chosen, this is what you've desired, for you will be as a terebinth tree whose leaf fades. Here's what you're going to be like. Those trees that you thought were so impressive and that you set up as a place for your formal worship, I'm going to turn you into one of those, like what happens in the fall. Because an oak tree is going to lose all of its leaves. That's what you're going to be seen as. To me, I'm going to look at you as those leaves that no longer have any vibrancy to them. They've died and they're falling from the tree. And as far as your gardens are concerned, you're going to be, to me, as I look at you, you're going to be as a garden that has no water. So could have been lush, could have had flowers, could have had trees, could have had all of that stuff, but you take away the source of water and there's nothing that will be able to sustain it. So it'll be a ruined garden, just wrecked, and the trees will have no leaves. There'll be no vibrancy to them. And where I live here, I've never understood this quite the same way, because living in California for all those years, you had some trees that would lose their leaves, but for the most part, most of the trees out there, as I recall it, are just kind of evergreens. So, that's not all the time, but you don't have it like we have here in Texas, where, man, when the fall comes, especially through the winter, there aren't a lot of trees with leaves on them. So everything is gray. You're seeing just the wood of the trees, and they don't look like they have any life to them, which always makes springtime that much more impressive, because they just explode with green in the springtime. So I get what he's talking about here. If you want to know what it would look like when God judges, think of a tree that has no leaves on it. You wouldn't know that there's any life in it during that, after the fall has happened and through the winter time. This is what you're going to look like. You think that you have life, this is what you'll be. You're like the tree that loses its leaves, or the garden that used to be lush, but it has no more water, so it just dies. So it says the strong will be just like tinder, and tinder is the stuff that you use to start a fire. So it's the pulling up the in this case maybe the leaves, or just the needles of pines, that stuff that burns very, very easily. So he says the strong are going to be like that. They're not strong, they're going to be just like tinder. That's the stuff that you gather up to make a fire, and the work of it as a spark. So everything that's produced of all of these people, that's what's just going to be what ignites the whole thing. Both will burn together, and no one will be able to quench it, simply because God's the one who's doing this. This is his judgment that's falling on the people. So very, very important to understand the imagery here. It is It's terrifying and it's spectacular, but incredibly, incredibly sad as well that this would be the condition of the people. And yet we have this history of them from their inception, and we know that this is just kind of the repeating pattern of rebellion and all the rest. And really, it's something that just follows humanity. God will give guidelines, and most people are going to, left to their own devices, look the other way. They will be in a place of rebellion. And it's just very, very sad to say, but it is their history. We'll keep it their history here, just looking at Judah and Jerusalem. But the application is that God is the same way. He requires that things are right and honorable and good as far as he defines them, and man is left to either reject those things or to accept them. There's no middle ground in this. So such an important truth to be found here. Again, we took our time getting through the first chapter mainly because it really helps set in motion why God's doing everything that he's doing through this whole time of these last of the kings. And there's still a long time to go. Remember, between Hezekiah and Manasseh, there's well over 100 years between those two kings and Josiah and then his sons. There's still a long time till it really kind of falls to the Babylonians. But they are going to see this up and down, because it's going to go again. You're going to go from Ahaz to Hezekiah, but you're going to be brought back down to Manasseh, back up to Josiah, and then that's the last of the good kings. So fascinating, fascinating history. So much for us to take away from this, so much to glean from it. But I'm tell you what, when I read this kind of stuff, one thing that I am thankful for when I read it is that God is always consistent. You always know where you stand with him. He will always do what he says he's going to do. So when he gives warning, or when he gives, a cause for us to walk with him in a particular way, that's a good thing. We know that he's faithful to do exactly as he says that he's going to do. So there's no uncertainty in that. And that should come as great, great comfort to all of us. So as we conclude this, I really want to address a couple of things that are kind of on my mind, considering what's happening tomorrow and the anniversary that it is, and this talks of the peace that's going on. Now, if you've been paying attention to what's happening in the news, you'll know. Interestingly enough, the plans that I'm seeing, this 20-point plan that Trump put out, this could have been done long time ago, and they've been talking about this kind of stuff for a while, but it just like out of nowhere, they finally just said, here's the 20-point plan. If Israel signs off on it, which they appear that they will have, then it's thrown into Hamas's court, and they have to agree to all of it. It's not up for a negotiation. That's what's really, really interesting about this. So if there's any kind of negotiation, that's a problem, because this was put out as these are the points. And when you start to read through them, and I'm going to review some of them with you, not all 20, but they're easy to find. If you want to just do a simple internet search of what are the 20 points of the peace plan between Hamas and Israel, you'll be able to pull up and see exactly what is being proposed. I'm going to look through a few of those with you here in a moment. But here's the interesting thing, and Israel has already said this, and I believe Netanyahu to be very, very serious about his statements. There really is no place for Hamas in this world. In any way. Now, you're going to still have your insurgents, you're still going to have your people who believe all this stuff, but they can't be allowed to exist in any way of an organization anywhere within Israel. They just can't. You might not be able to get rid of them out of Qatar and other places that they are. They're just terrorists, and they're always going to find a place to operate. So that much we know, but Israel has said they just don't have a place here in Israel anymore. It just can't be. Trump has backed that up. You'll find that even in the writing that's here. So does that mean that even if Hamas were to agree to this, that they're going to go away? Hardly. Hamas put out in 1988, I believe it was, they put out their charter, and you can go get it online. I think it's got over 30, about 33, I think, maybe 34 different tenets, and it's pretty bizarre, actually. Some of it's pretty obvious. And but they do some other things where they talk about the culture and what Islam has produced for the world and all this other weird stuff. But the other stuff, when it's really directed at Israel, you know why they are what they are, and you know why they did what they did 2 years ago tomorrow. And so they make it plainly clear. To think that somehow these guys are going to somehow change their whole outlook, because we need to be reminded theirs is a religious ideology. And so it's not something that you just say, okay, we've reconsidered and we're going to give back your 20 hostages if they're still alive, and the remains of the other, 24. I think that they say 44 is what the number is, or something similar to that. So whether they're there or not, we don't really know. But it just seems like it came out of nowhere, kind of an interesting thing. And I think Hamas gave what I thought was kind of what they were going to give anyway. They're going to try to make this some kind of a negotiation and string it out a little bit further. What's really hard for me to wrap my mind around is if they gave back all of the hostages, then they have no more bargaining chips. And even in the things that are here, that I'll read for you in a few moments, some of the tenets of this, it's pretty clear from all of this that there's really no future for these guys. And they're going to want to try to make sure that there is. So how do you negotiate something like that? Hopefully, if they're ever able to get some kind of an agreement on this, the idea that either Israel or the United States would capitulate on this, frankly, I'm a little uneasy sometimes when I hear the stuff that we're going to allow Israel, or we're going to allow something, as though we're the ones who decide, who are really giving orders. Makes me a little troubled. I don't like that. I don't like the optics of it. Do I really think that Netanyahu sees himself as a puppet? I don't. People will disagree on that. But what will end up happening out of this? I mean, there's people negotiating as we speak. They're meeting in Cairo right now. And I do expect Hamas is really going to try to string this along. I don't think there's any question about that. They'll find some way to try to hold power. But the moment that they give away the hostages, they give away the last little bit of leverage that they have. And if they don't agree to the rest, if they give up the hostages first and don't agree to the rest, Israel's able to go in, because it's basically a breach of the agreement. So what will be interesting is to see what happens with this agreement. What I want to do is bring up some of the tenets of this. If you haven't had a chance to work through it, you can look at all 20. There's a lot more detail. I've actually kind of scaled this down. It's not all 20. I just took some of the pieces of it that are important, make some comment on it. I actually even removed some of the wording from it just so that it would fit on a slide. But I want to bring that up and let's work through it. And I want to bring up one other point that I think is vital to our understanding of how this is going to go. So let's take a look at some of the elements of this agreement. Okay, so what you see here in front of you, I've left, you see it's number 1, number 2, number 5. If you look at this online, you're going to notice that 1 and 2 is pretty much what you're going to see there. I've taken out 3 and 4 just because I want to move through the most prominent portions of this, and the ones that will be as, I think, as problematic or divisive as any that are going to go on there. These are really the things that will probably be what blows this all apart. Now, I don't want to seem cynical on this, but I'm let's just say I'm skeptical. How about that? We'll use that one. So 1 says that Gaza will be a terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors. Now, as we conclude this, I'm going to give you the reason why I think that this is impossible. And mainly that's because the participants here, in this case Hamas, is free to say whatever they want to, but do I think that they're going to go away quietly? If that was the case, they probably would have taken the offer a year ago that we'll let all of you guys out, turn over the hostages, we'll give you free passage, you can get out of here. And that was offered on numerous occasions by the Netanyahu government, and without even this many provisions, and Hamas has repeatedly rejected that. Or they say, we accept those terms, but then they say, but we want these things in return, and they make it so impossible that Israel would never agree to any of that. And that's why we just keep going round and round, which is why it seems unlikely that this will end differently. Number 2 says that Gaza will be redeveloped for the benefit of the people of Gaza. Now that's what's going to be very interesting. How are you planning to do that? Where are you planning on putting the people who are there? Because what they're going to have to do is completely remove all of the buildings that are just there in rubble, but they've got to collapse all the tunnels because you can't build over that stuff. It's undermining the integrity of the ground. And there's over 100 miles, hundreds of miles from what I understand now. There are as many as hundreds of miles definitely more than 100 miles of tunnel underground. And that, again, when you want to try to build new stuff over it, you have to have good foundation. And this is undermining so much of that part of the country. So it says, once all the hostages are released, that was the stuff that's in 3:4. It's about the releasing of the hostages and what will happen after that. You can read those. But after the hostages are released, Israel will release 250 life sentence prisoners plus 1,700 Gazans who were detained after the 7th of October 23, including all women and children detained in that context. For every Israeli hostage whose remains are released, Israel will release the remains of 15 deceased Gazans. So interesting that this is the kind of exchange, but the thing that you're finding here, which there will probably be the requirement from Hamas, the numbers are going to have to be much greater than this, and the people that they're going to ask for are just the worst of the worst of the worst. And they've already pulled that off once already, just to get some of the hostages back. So I expect them to make this just a poison pill. This may be one of the places where Hamas makes a demand that just nobody will ever agree to. Number 6 says, once all the hostages are returned, Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence and to decommission their weapons will be given amnesty. Members of Hamas who wish to leave Gaza will be provided safe passage to receiving countries. The second part of that's great. The first part of this, once the hostages are returned, then Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence and decommission their weapons will be given amnesty. That's lunacy. So the idea that you could trust anything that they would say, when they were able to get these armaments the last time, they will be able to get them again. And we're going to get into how they can go ahead and they can promise anything, but they are completely told, actually, I don't want to go too far ahead, but lying is just not a problem for them. So they can say whatever they want to say in order to bring about the ends that they want. So here's the thing that really always gets lost in this. The people having these discussions don't understand the spiritual dynamics behind this. So Israel is brought back into the land because God's brought them back in. And so, of course, that puts them in the crosshairs literally because the devil hates them, and more so than other people. As far as outside of the church, there's nobody that is hated to the same way that the Jews are. And it's actually easily actionable towards them because they have their own country and they have their own enclaves throughout the world, and they become targets of just hatred. So there's a spiritual dynamic behind this. It's the only explanation for why they're always singled out for the kind of hatred that they are. So to think that the people who have been going through this for 2 years at war are just going to say, okay, fine, we can just take defeat and we're good with that. Here's my guns, but I want to stay behind in Gaza. You're building an insurgency at that point, I fear. Number 9 says Gaza will be governed under the temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee responsible for delivering the day-to-day running of public services and municipalities for the people of Gaza. That is a de facto government that they're putting in place, and Hamas has already said, we want a seat at that table. So they're not planning on going anywhere as it sits right now. But who are these people going to be? I've heard lots of things said, and when you try to press for an answer, you get a lot of double speak on this. But the thing that's really kind of distressing about this, you're going to pretty much put back in another government that will be probably more reminiscent of like what you have with the Palestinian Authority in Judea Samaria under Mahmoud Abbas. Again, an evil terrorist man, just like Arafat, who he took place of. Remember, he was supposed to just have they had elections, and he was supposed to be in until the next election. They've never had an election since, and he's been in charge for 20 years. So, number 10, a Trump economic development plan to rebuild and energize Gaza will be created by opening a panel of experts who have helped birth some of the thriving modern miracles in the Middle East. So the same people who have been doing the stuff around the Middle East are the same ones who are going to be putting this together. This is something that Trump was talking about he's been talking about it for quite some time. His whole thing is, I'm a developer. I know how to do this kind of stuff. So if we can get everybody to agree and put down their weapons, I can develop this, and we can make it the Riviera of the Mediterranean again. Or it can be. That used to be seen as Lebanon. But we can fix this. That's his whole thing. Verse number 12 is that no one will be forced to leave Gaza, and those who wish to leave will be free to do so and free to return. We will encourage people to stay and offer them the opportunity to build a better Gaza. Now, this all sounds great, but the problem is it can't be done spiritually speaking, because there's such hatred on the spiritual side between Islam and Judaism. That's what's caused Hamas. That's what's caused all of these problems. So to think that somehow that's eliminated is just, it's not understanding the nature of your enemy. And it's also just, you're taking them at their word, which is a bad idea. 13, Hamas and other factions agree to not have any role in the governance of Gaza directly, indirectly, or in any form. All military, terror, and offensive infrastructure, including tunnels and weapons production facilities, will be destroyed and not rebuilt. Well, first of all, that's impossible to enforce unless you're going to be taking it over. But they're saying, no, this is going to be an autonomous government. You're just asking for the exact same thing to happen again. And this is one of the things that Hamas is already insisting on. We want a seat at the table in all of this. Here it says they have no seat. So to me, this is poison pill stuff. Hamas can say, we're all for it, but we won't go away quietly. You have to make sure that we still have a seat at the table. 16 says that Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza. There's an independent group, the ISF. This is what will be created to help oversee this. Once it establishes control and stability, the Israeli Defense Forces will withdraw based on standards, milestones, and timeframes linked to demilitarization that will be agreed upon between the IDF and the ISF, the guarantors, and the United States, with the objective to secure Gaza that no longer poses any threat to Israel, Egypt, or its citizens. Now, that sounds great. But once again, you're going to try to set up some kind of a puppet government there. And really what you do have is Israel can go right back in and do it all over again if this is not seen, if it's not put back in place. My problem with it is if you pull this and make this whole thing happen, you will get the people who will say, yep, we'll get along with everybody, and they'll go right back to doing all of this stuff. We know how bad countries and nations are at oversight. And I'll even say this, maybe if this happened, the Trump administration would be really good about making sure that the bad guys are out of control and not able to oversee anything. But you're going to have, eventually you'll have another changeover in government. So imagine something like this being overseen by somebody like Obama or Biden, the last two administrations surrounding Trump, who really hated Israel and made it obvious that they did. So who would you want those people being in any kind of control on this? It's just a recipe for disaster. This one here, verse 18, it's not verse, it's number 18. An interfaith dialogue process will be established based on the values of tolerance and peaceful coexistence to try to change the mindsets and narratives of the Palestinians and the Israelis by emphasizing the benefits that can be derived from peace. So on the one side, the groups of Hamas and the people who live there in Gaza have a religious ideology that calls for the destruction of the Israeli state and the killing of all Jews. So the idea that you can have some, quote, interfaith dialogue, this is insanity. This is goofy stuff. So you're going to have what you will need to bring this kind of thing to pass. This is the kind of stuff I personally believe that the Antichrist will pull off and he'll make himself look like this, this who's able to do these things. Nobody's been able to do this before. He'll be seen and looked at as some kind of a Messiah figure because he's been able to do the impossible. But the idea that you can bring these people together when, you have a lot of people who are very, very angry on the Jewish side of this because of what happened on October the 7th. Then you have a lot of people inside of Gaza who don't care a bit. They want to do it. They will do it again and again. Hamas has said so. there will be another repeat of what we've done before. We're not going away. So then the 20th one, the United States will establish a dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians to agree on a political horizon for peaceful and prosperous coexistence. This is that whole nonsense of a two-state solution. So this is going to be something that they are going to pursue. Unfortunately, it's going to continue to be a failure. There's just no way that you can make these things work. It's just not going to be able to happen the way that it's written, because unfortunately, the people in Hamas are just, frankly, they're never going to agree to this. Now, there's one other thing that I think is very important, and people may be familiar with the term, but I want to bring it up here just so that we can look at it. So let me bring this slide up. It's kind of helpful to us. All right, so as you look at this, this is known as takia. And takia, it tells you, comes from these root words, basically is to fear or to guard against. Here's what it ultimately means. It means that, or it's connoting, and I took this from an Islamic site. I didn't give attribution to it. They don't deserve it, but you can find it in all the different places. This is just a textbook definition. You can find this on any of the Islamic sites that are willing to say it. Or if you go on, you can watch YouTubes of these guys saying exactly what it is. But its meaning connotes guarding one's self out of fear through whatever means, and of course, in Islamic jurisprudence, it becomes more complex. The accurate translation of taqiya would be dissimulation, which means to conceal one's beliefs through displaying opposite views and actions. Or the meaning of taqiya would be to protect oneself from harm caused by others by agreeing with them in word or in action, even if it contradicts the truth. And they're willing to say this. So let me pull this down. And so I ask you, as you read that definition that's there, that you've seen on the screen there, if you read that definition and you think somehow when you read the different tenets that we've looked at, not all 20, just the ones that we looked at, and then you say, you're going to sit across the table from some people who can say, well, we fear the outcome of this, so we're going to tell you everything that you want to hear, and we have our religious sanction to lie through our teeth to the furthering of our cause. So if people don't understand this, whenever they hear two-state solution, land for peace, we can do a peace plan, we can negotiate, we can do this, that, and the other thing. If Hamas was to think that they could let go of the hostages and get passage out, but leave a whole bunch of people who will swear off violence and turn in their guns, and that they've had some kind of a reformation in their lives, then you're a fool. And ultimately, you can say right here from their own sources, and it's not hard to find, they will say, we could look at you and lie through our teeth. Not for a moment will we have any problem with this. We will tell you that we will do one thing, and we will do the total opposite, and we have religious sanction from our religious view that we can do this. And you won't know that we've been lying until it becomes obvious, because we will go back on what we've said. This is why if there's anything less than the complete obliteration of everything that is Hamas, there's no way that this doesn't start happening all over again, even if they start the peace process. Before they could probably finish the first building, there would already be new tunnels being built, and there would be all kinds of subversive things. So these people have proved, by Gaza, they have proved that they cannot self-govern. It's hard enough for Israel to try to keep peace in parts of what is known as Judea, Samaria, or what they call the West Bank. There are places where that's even in our trips to Israel, we don't go through them. There's no reason to go there. It's just you're putting yourself in harm's way. It would be basically the same thing. If everything that's right here became reality, and somebody wanted to say, let's go take a trip and we'll go driving around Gaza, I probably wouldn't be interested in going. Because let's face it, Hamas is going to be really ready to engage again, and they're angry with what happened. Most of their leadership got taken out. These guys have an axe to grind, and they have a religious fervor to do it. They're stirred up by that. So where it goes from here, it's going to be really interesting, but do I think that it could ever happen like it's laid out here? Not in the long run. It may be agreed to up front. There'll be ulterior motives, but it'll be an interesting thing to watch what happens over these next few weeks, which they say it could take some time for this to happen. But man, I'll tell you what, if they start to release hostages, then I cannot wait for what Hamas will say of here are our demands. And this was really presented to them as this is not a negotiation. Here's the terms. You see to these things or else Israel can go back in. That's the way that Trump put it out there. So we'll see what happens next, but it's a pretty fascinating thing to behold. So any questions on any of that, please contact me through the ministry's website, oldpaththeology.net. And if you like, you can send me an email if you didn't get a chance to screen capture, but you'd like copies of what I had up here for these 2 slides. I'm always willing to make those available to you. And we will pick up at chapter 2 of Isaiah next week. And I look forward to starting to move our way through this book.